Hey, welcome to the Treehouse Athenaeum, a place to discover the tools that empower you to embrace both the beauty and challenges of personal growth. There are so many branches leading to your roots. Come on, let's explore.
Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, good middle of the night, wherever you are in your day. Today is an unusual kind of day in the treehouse. It is a solo dolo day with just me, Lisa, and I wanted to talk about something that comes up pretty frequently when I am in session with my clients, when I am talking a friend through a big life change, and that is the concept of the upper limit problem. So the upper limit problem comes from an author named Gay Hendricks. And in this book, which is called The Big Leap, Gay Hendricks talks about how there are all these different zones of excellence and neutrality and all these different kind of things that you explore as you grow as a human. He has this hypothesis too that when you are hitting your growth edges, right, you're on the border of a tipping point, you're on the border of going into that zone of excellence, your subconscious is going to get a little bit self-conscious, and say, oh, I don't know about that, because I know what is going on right now. And this is something that we've talked about on the treehouse before, right? How your subconscious is like, whoa there, baby, hold on a minute. Like, I already know what's happening in my life. Why would I want to change it? Because I already know how to be safe in this particular version of myself. So in the book, The Big Leap, the theory is that anytime you are pushing up against one of your growth edges, trying to make some sort of significant choice or change in your life, you're coming up against 1 to 2, but not all 4 at the same time of the upper limit problems. So the 4 upper limit problems that could be a potential factor in any sort of up-leveling that you have are going to be fear of outshining others, fear of leaving other people behind, fear of inherent unworthiness, and then the last one is going to be fear of burden of success. Now, it's very rare that these things show up as like an obvious concept, right? Like, we all know what it's like to self-sabotage, and we all know what it's like to go and talk to the person that you have a crush on, and then all of a sudden you say something embarrassing like, oh, I peed my pants in 5th grade, and that wasn't even true. And then you walk away and you think, why did I just do that? Like, there was no reason for that. There was absolutely no reason for that. And the reason is because your brain is like, hello, we're safe in here exactly as we are. Why are you trying to change things? And when you catch yourself doing some of that behavior that is just, you're like, where the fuck did that come from? It's probably coming from the upper limit problem. So what I wanted to do today is kind of walk through what each of those 4 things means, and then invite you to think about just any kind of situation in your life where you sense that things are changing, and take a look at it through the lens of these upper limit problems and see where your root cause might be coming from. So let's start with fear of outshining others. In my job as a coach, I work around a lot of heart-centered people, right? That's how you get into this occupation in the first place. You just really have a desire for helping people and listening to them and making them feel heard and seen and strategizing with them to get to the next point of their life that they want to be at, and really building the life that they know that they're capable of, but they're not really sure how to get there. So anyway, fear of outshining others is a really common one. Because, I mean, how many times have you been in a room, and I know I am guilty of this, where you're listening to somebody talk and like there's this big presentation and you're like, oh my God, who cares? And that isn't really fair to the speaker, right? Because somebody cares. They care if they're the ones talking about it, and if they're talking about it and they don't care, chances are somebody who does care asked them to do it. So there's that very act of that, right? Like the side slacking, if you're a corporate worker, or passing notes in class. Do kids still pass notes in class? Texting under the table, I guess, if you're younger. All of those things, like having those side conversations, sends a signal to your brain saying, hey, it's actually not okay when other people have center stage. And so therefore people will definitely be annoyed with you if you have center stage, if you have this level up, and it'll make them feel bad about themselves. So for you to be able to stay exactly where you're at right now, what you have to do is dull your shine a little bit. And I don't think that anybody really does this knowingly, right? Like it's kind of one of those things that you look at after the fact. And that's kind of a pitfall of this because there's only so much editing you can do while you look retrospectively. But there are certain things that you can do to mitigate the damage, right? Like if damage is caused, if harm is caused, or it might just be a situation where you're like, ooh, I noticed myself feeling like more and more activated every time I'm getting up and speaking my piece or watching somebody else get up and speak their piece. That's definitely a pattern to examine because chances are somewhere in your life you are trying to grow and you might feel like, oh my God, I might make someone else feel bad. I might make someone else feel bad just by being me, by doing the thing that I'm supposed to be doing. So that is the quick little overview of fear of outshining others. The next one is really closely related. In fact, there's a lot of overlap in the Venn diagram here. And the next one is going to be the fear of leaving someone behind. And again, I think it's easiest to relate this back to the workplace, right? I don't know how many times I've worked in locations, and this happened a lot when I worked in Florida, where there's a lot of transients, right? Like it used to be that folks would stay loyal to companies for like their entire adult lives. And that was the sign of a good worker, was the loyalty, right? And now we kind of live in this world where it's not necessarily about the loyalty to any sort of corporation. It's about loyalty to yourself. And I think that millennials and Gen Xers in particular were kind of the ones that broke the code about how to earn more money in today's job market. And honestly, it could be switching as I'm recording this. I don't really know. But the way to earn more money isn't always just moving up within a company, right? Like there are companies who have entire policies about like you can't jump up too many salary bands because that could set a bad precedent, or you're probably not ready for something of that magnitude, like whatever internal reasons there are. But the point is, we've all experienced our work bestie or someone that we really enjoy working with moving on to a different job. Like that's something that's increasingly more common and easier to relate to. And so when that person leaves, I mean, usually there's some sort of sentiment that goes with that. Like, oh my God, I'm so happy for you. But also like, how could you leave us? And the fact of the matter is everybody is going to move on at some point. Everybody is going to make some sort of decision about whether or not they want to move on and look for another job. Sometimes layoffs occur, sometimes firings occur. Sometimes you have someone that is totally content being in the same place throughout their entire career, but they're still going to experience that transience because there's a larger majority of people that want to move around and expand their career and talk about growth and change and all these other things. So there can very often be this fear that you might leave someone behind, right? And I think that's very, very easy to get trapped in when you are in the last week or two of wrapping up your previous role, moving into the next one, because you get those graduation goggles on, right? Like well, I don't want to say we all, but many of us experience that with senioritis in high school, right? And if you haven't heard of it, senioritis is basically like, man, I only have so many days left. Like, what is the point? What is the point of being in here? And then you kind of get like that vitamin C song, the graduation song, like the as we go on, we remember. That is going to be like, kind of the soundtrack to your head, right? You're looking back on the good times. It's harder to remember the bad times very often when you're leaving a job because there's a light at the end of the tunnel. Right. And so if you've forged these close bonds with people that have really been a wonderful, proactive, like productive part of this current chapter of your life, it can be really hard to think about the possibility of leaving them behind. Now, just because you are moving on to a different location, job, career, whatever. And by the way, job is just the context for this. This can be a multitude of different things, right? What you're up against is you're like, God, I might leave my work bestie behind. What if this is the last time that I ever talk to these people? And the fact of the matter is, like, most people in your life are designed just to be there for a season. You yourself are a side character in some people's stories. You are the main character in your own story. You're probably like the lead romantic interest in someone else's story. You could be the villain in someone else's story. The point is, depending upon who you're talking to, you have fewer lines in some of these scenes than others. And some of those characters will come with you throughout your entire story, right? Like 2 of my oldest friends in the world, they very generously got married just for me. So I didn't have to keep up with them separately. It had nothing to do with their love for each other and how great they are as a couple. But one of them I've been friends with since I was 3 years old, and the other since middle school. But anytime I go to visit them, I am typically just spending time with them from my hometown. And their kiddos, of course. But I don't always make as big of an effort to see other friends from that same time period. And it's because those 2 people have been with me through so many different iterations of my life. And the iteration of me has fit with the iteration of who they are, or we're able to accept it and there's still some like sort of value out of that. And since this has been going on for over 3 decades now, like I'm not really that afraid of leaving them behind because I've been friends with them through a lot of different things, 2 different cross-country moves. We just make it work, as opposed to maybe feeling a connection with someone that is within the area, right? And you're like, oh my God, they're so amazing. Like they're one of my favorite parts of living right now. If I lose them, like I stand to lose a whole lot. But maybe they're not meant to go to that next part with you. Or maybe they are and they'll surprise you. And the other thing is, people themselves are evolving all the time. And this is actually a conversation that I had to have with myself a few nights in a row before I went to go see Dave and Daniela in Orlando a couple of weeks ago. And that was, I was kind of wrestling with myself and thinking, I haven't been back to Orlando since I moved in 2020. 2020 was 2020, right? So I couldn't say goodbye to most people because of the health concern that was in the air. And so I was thinking, I have changed significantly in the last little over 4 years because I moved at the end of 2020. And I have done a lot of inner work and introspection and really like polished and refined the person that I am today. And I'm still working. I'm still a work in progress, just like all of us are. However, I'm very different on the inside than who I was when I was living in Orlando. Now, that doesn't mean that there aren't aspects of me that are still me. I'm still going to be Lisa. I'm still going to do weird things. I'm still going to come up with like one-liners and all of the things that make me me. Those things haven't changed at my core, but the context of the things that I'm interested in and want to spend my energy on have changed significantly. So having that conversation with myself, like, you know what, Lisa, these people did not just sit still the second that you left. It's not like they've just been sitting around waiting for you to come back and have the grand reveal. They've changed a lot too. That was a pretty significant realization for me, right? And that was very, very helpful to think about before going into that situation, because otherwise I could have not thought about it. I could have just gone into it and being like, oh my God, like I need to regress and turn into the person that I was to a T to make sure that these people still like me and be the version of myself that I was around them. Now, when I was in Orlando, I did go back a couple of times into this and slide into this old version of me, but then I was able to kind of like recuperate it and think, okay, how would 2025 Lisa handle that? And sometimes I even think further beyond that, like how would 2027 Lisa handle that? Where's she at right now? Like, how can I step into that version of her to get there that much more quickly? But anyway, the point is you could potentially leave someone behind, or they could potentially come with you. But you never know. You never know how many chapters you're going to have someone for. So you might as well make the most of it and really just appreciate and have gratitude for anyone that helped further your story as you move along, right? Like Harry Potter probably wouldn't be that famous without Voldemort. So just saying. But Voldemort shouldn't have killed his parents. I'm not condoning violence in the wizarding world or otherwise. The next one is fear of being unworthy. And I think this is the one that is probably most common. And when I start talking about the upper limit problem, particularly with clients, I find that this is often the one that they cite. They're like, ooh, that's the one. And this is a hard one to dig into, right? Like you hear about this a lot with imposter syndrome. I think that imposter syndrome is, I'm glad that it's a more broadly used term now because so many people experience it. But you know who doesn't experience it? Imposters. Because they already know. They already know that they're lying. They already know that they're trying to, fit in. And there is some merit to stepping into a version of yourself that you don't feel fits you 100% yet. Because that's how you stretch to fill that gap. But there's nobody that's like sitting around saying, this person is worthy, this person isn't. Like there is no stamp like that, right? Like if we're looking at this on like a spiritual level and thinking about it through that lens, like if that's something that you believe in, like God, the universe, source, spirit, whatever you want to call your outward assistance, nobody is sitting there going, yes, no, yes, no. Like, you are your thoughts. That is how psychology works, right? And if you're looking for proof of that, that whole red car thing that we've talked about before is where that comes into effect, right? I'm looking for a red car. Now all I see is red cars on the road. I'm looking for a reason to believe that I'm not worthy. Now all I can see is reasons that I'm not worthy. And it can take some really hard conversations with yourself, with people that you trust, external, internal processing. I don't know which way you do it, but the point is it can be really difficult to get to the root of this one. And this is one where I really recommend therapy and finding a good therapist. And that's because like it can take a long time to unpack. And oftentimes when I unpack this type of thing for myself, I describe it as like pulling out this like knotted ball of yarn or like a super knotted like chain for a necklace. And you're just like, oh my God, like there's no way I can do this. And there's gotta be someone else that can come in here with like a needle or like scissors or something to help me pry this thing apart. And that's really important. It's kind of an ongoing process too, because it can be really difficult to be the most reliable narrator of your entire story. So having someone else there to help you sift through it can be really, really advantageous. And that act in and of itself makes it a lot easier to deal with the upper limit problem of the feeling of unworthiness when it comes up, right? Like it gets a lot easier to knock down. For my video game buddies out there, this is like, you know how in the beginning of like any given Mario game, you're just fighting some Goombas on the ground and you're like, oh, little ground pound and we'll see you never. But then you get to one of the bosses, like, Bowser, whomever happens to be terrorizing the Mushroom Kingdom at that point. And it's not just a ground pound stomp, right? But you've been practicing your moves and your tactics and your tools and what's available to you. And it makes it a lot easier to defeat Bowser at the end because you've been picking up all of these other skills along the way. So that fear of unworthiness is real, y'all. And everyone has experienced it at some point, right? There The fact of the matter is there isn't anybody that can say, okay, you are worthy or you aren't. That's an internal thing. And I know how easy it is to seek external validation on that. And I know how uncomfortable it is to trust yourself on that. And this is going to sound made up, but it's not. I went and saw a monk speak last night. A good friend attends, she goes to a yoga studio that had invited this monk in as a guest. And he was talking about at the very beginning of his speech, he was like, you shouldn't trust everything that I say. You should trust yourself. He's like, if what I'm saying resonates with you, then keep it. Like, mull it over, think about it. But if it doesn't, just throw it in the trash. And he's right, because at the end of the day, it's really about like, can you trust you to make the right moves moving forward? And that is a skill that takes time, especially after internalizing a lot of stuff as a kid, as a teenager. I mean, I'm not like a licensed therapist, right? Like I think psychology is super interesting. I've done a lot of work into it, but I'm not an actual therapist. But I do think that there's a lot to be said about the kinds of stories that you develop and learn for yourself when you are a teenager in particular, because you're starting to feel more of the independence of being an adult, but you haven't quite learned the emotional regulation part that comes from being a kid, right? Like it's a lot to implement and reconcile. And I think that a lot of folks really get stuck in that mindset from when they were a teenager, because that's when they were getting the most feedback, from the other kids, from teachers, from parents, if school was a part of your experience. So it's kind of hard to dismiss those teenage stories if they live in your head rent-free for many years into your adulthood as well, right? And if you start to notice one of those stories coming up, that is a great time to pause and say, okay, how old was I when I developed this belief? And furthermore, do I trust myself at that age? What else has changed about me since then? What have I learned since then? And that doesn't necessarily have to be like, okay, well, let's see, back at that time I was doing pre-algebra, but at this point, I did pass a calculus class. Like, it's not necessarily like that. It's like, what did you learn on these streets, the streets of life? And that's really more where it comes from. So that one is the fear of unworthiness. And then the last one feels a little bit counterintuitive, and that is fear of the burden of success, right? And that can mean you're burdening other people around you with your success. It could mean that you feel you yourself are a bigger burden because you're a success. I mean, how many times have you seen a movie where there was someone that was just like super high up, high powered, working like 90 hours a week at work, and they were like a super mega jillionaire, but they were just so sad because they didn't ever get to spend time with their family, or people only wanted to talk to them for their money, or things like that. And the moral of those stories is always money doesn't buy happiness. And there's this underlying kind of message of, if you become successful, do you see how big of a burden you will be? And nobody wants to feel like a freaking burden. And so while it's true that money doesn't buy happiness, it does buy things that support happiness, right? And happiness is one of those things where, yes, it does make sense to chase it. There is nothing like laughing until you're crying with someone that you really care about. But to be content is really, I think, what most people mean when they say they want to be happy. Like, I am totally fine with where I'm at. I'm content. I have no complaints, as opposed to that kind of like euphoric feeling that goes on. And nobody wants to have that robbed from them, either the contentedness or the euphoria, right? Because it does feel so good to really get into something that you love and adore and, hold high regard for. But is it going to be worth it if that means that, Paramount is going to produce a picture? What year is it? It is the 20s, but it's not the 1920s. If Paramount makes a movie about like, okay, well, this person was fine, and then all they had to do was give up all their money, and then all the simple pleasures in life found them. Really what the message of that is gratitude for what you have. It's not give up everything and then you'll be happy. Because I don't know, happiness is just kind of like this elusive chase, and you won't become a burden just because you find success. Okay, there is struggle in finding success, and that can feel like a burden, but that doesn't make you yourself the burden. And just like all of the other items on this list, it's just something to be mindful of. It's something to think about and notice, like, okay, I'm kind of acting like not me. So that moves to the little bow on top of this whole thing, which is the upper limit problems might not show up like as cut and dry as I just described them. They'll be like that at the base, but you may be doing like self-sabotaging behaviors. So let's say that you start dating someone new, right? And you have this, your upper limit problem on this one is that you're afraid of leaving someone behind. And that someone could be your best friend, because you and your best friend talk all the time, all day, every day. You have like a really fun relationship with them. You know that you can spend time with them. And there's like a part of you that's like, you know, friendships change when you get into a romantic relationship. And so you might be trying to protect that the friendship by not letting yourself go all the way into the romantic relationship. And that's a good thing to an extent, right? Like, you don't want to get swallowed up completely in another person, like, for the rest of time. That's not viable. That's not necessarily loving yourself as fully as you could. So you might do something like start little fights with this person over nothing. You know, you might like get into a fight with them over, I don't know, dinner choice or something. Like, oh, well, I wanted to go out to a Brazilian steakhouse. Well, I wanted to go out to a salad bar. And you make a mountain out of a molehill on that. And it's really got nothing to do with the person that you're arguing with. It's more of like, I know if I put this wedge in here, then I'm protecting my friendship because I'm not getting so close to this new person that my existing friendship is in trouble, right? So this is where you catch yourself having these kind of like unusual behaviors, and you have to think to yourself, okay, is this destructive? If so, what is the destruction for? Is it productive destruction? Like when you have a plant or like a prescribed burn for a forest to clear out some stuff? Or is this a wildfire where you're actually putting people in danger? And the people in danger would be the people within your life, you know? So you have to make that discernment. You have to be very mindful about, why is this like this? And this goes back to the part where like the only judgment that you can trust is your own, which is not to say you can't trust other people. It's to say that you're the one that has to live with the consequences of your actions, whatever that might be. So living by the consequences of your actions doesn't necessarily have to be a negative thing either. Like if you catch yourself getting into fights that are really stupid and little with this person that you're interested in, and you're like, well, maybe I need to be more mindful about upholding my friendship with my best friend so that they don't feel left behind. That's like a good thing. Right? That's the type of thing where it's like, okay, I'm glad that you took a step back, because in that situation, you can have your cake and eat it too. And yes, your friend might be a little bit sad that you are starting to spend more time with someone else, or starting to invest some of those like deeper secrets that you would have only entrusted them with someone new. But chances are they're not doing that like consciously. So there's a lot of subconscious stuff to unpack here. It's always a fascinating process. And I really encourage you to find someone that you trust, whether that's a therapist, whether that is a friend that you know, like, will hold a safe space for you, to have these types of conversations about, okay, like, I'm noticing some weird behavior popping up. I wonder if this is related to this perceived change within my life. So anyway, that's the upper limit problem. I will make sure to get the title and the author in the show notes so y'all can read it if you want. It is a skinny little book, pretty easy to knock out quickly, and it's so applicable to so many different things. I know I just talked about it like in the sense of like work and romantic relationships, but it literally can apply to any single thing that you're trying to make like a significant change in. And it's just your subconscious being like, man, I just want to keep us safe. But in today's world, we're not really getting chased by tigers, lions, and bears. The The types of threats are just different, but we still have that like really primal survival instinct that kicks in. And that's where the upper limit problem comes from. So thank you for listening today. I hope that you had a great time learning about this, or maybe you felt a little bit uncomfortable and now you feel, empowered to think through what kinds of changes in your life you might be experiencing right now and who could help you? Who could help you sort through that? So thanks for joining me in the Solo Dolo Treehouse episode. I will see you next time.
Thanks for joining us in the treehouse today. If you enjoyed your time here, can you do us one little favor and send this episode over to someone else who might need to hear it? We love ratings, reviews, and recommendations. We appreciate you so much. Have a gorgeous day.